What can you learn by stepping back in order to move forward? Stay tuned and find out.
Welcome. Okay, here's the question.
Serious?
How are we dark horses? You know, the ones everyone is betting against, the ones they don't expect to win, place, or even show on the track, and they'll even laugh on us when we talk about trying. How do we show the world our greatness and triumph?
Come on.
Well, that's the question, and this podcast will give you the answers.
Let's go.
This is The Dark Horse Entrepreneur. My name is Tracy Brinkman.
And push it up.
What is up? What is up? What the hell is up, my Dark Horse friends and family? Welcome back to your weekly dose of actor to entrepreneur learning. I'm your Dark Horse host, Tracy Brinkman. And you? Well, that, my friend, is infinitely more important. You are a driven entrepreneur or one in the making. Either way, you're here because you're ready to start, restart, or kickstart, or just start leveling up with some great marketing, personal, or business tips and results in order to build that beautiful business of yours into the empire it absolutely deserves to be. And man, do we have an episode for you today. Today, Michael Stein is going to be sharing about long shots, dark horses, underdogs, being inspired by Rocky, the sweet spot generation, how some generations take for granted the lessons learned by other generations, the value of learning, and the benefits of doing as a way of learning. Plus, I'm going to let you in on next week's interview episode guest who spent 13 years in the streets, in gangs, and oil fields, and went from there to building a six-figure business and rubbing elbows with multi-million-dollar entrepreneurs. As per usual, the Dark Horse Corrals are chock full of personal, business, and marketing gold spilling from every corner of the Dark Horse Entrepreneur HQ. So let's get to the starting gates and go. All right, my Dark Horse friends and family, today's guest, as I said before, is Michael Stein. Now, Michael Stein is an American entrepreneur, actor, entertainer, stand-up comedian, and filmmaker. Michael is also the founder of Stein Media and Abaddek Incorporated. You see, Stein Media is an independent production company that creates multiple genres of films such as television commercials, events, and films around the U.S. Abaddek is a Tarps selling company in Georgetown, Texas, and it's also actively involved in charity work. Now, beyond all that, Michael is probably best known for his work in Rituals and Resolutions, The Dirk Diggler Story, Boogie Nights, Love Hollywood Style, and so many others. Stein is recognized for his entrepreneurial and creative skills and has also worked with several of the top artists such as Paul Thomas Anderson, the Academy Award-winning actress Faye Dunaway, Peter Gruber, John Peters, Andy Dick, Coolio, and Stephen Tobolowsky. Stein's award-winning production, Rituals and Resolutions, was even acquired by HBO and has been distributed internationally. Man, there are so many stories, so let's get stuck right in. All right, my Dark Horse friends and family. So here we are for round two. Michael, welcome to the Dark Horse Entrepreneur, man. How you doing?
It's doing great. A pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And actually, it's funny. I say round two for those that don't know, and you'll know shortly, is that Michael and I actually did this. Oh, God, was it the end of May? I think it was, and had an amazing conversation. And something happened to the recording, so that when I sat down to edit it, it wasn't there. Oh, wah, wah, wah. But Michael's so cool. He's coming back to reshare his story. So that's the first thing I want to do, Michael, is I want to shut up my babbling mouth for you to tell your story, that good, the bad, the ugly. And it was a really cool story of what brought you to where you are and why you love doing what you do so much.
Okay. Well, I guess, we were talking about me. I think we were talking about me starting my podcast, Long Shot Leaders, and why I'm doing a podcast called Long Shot Leaders. And that is, I consider myself a long shot, not the best long shot you ever heard, but I consider myself coming from a long line of long shots. My grandmother escaped the Russian concentration camps on her way to America. My dad was a homeless New York street kid, eventually became a multimillionaire, only to become a homeless guy again. And I was a unplanned child. I was born with a lot of physical, issues, health issues. And I had ADHD, which they didn't know what it was back then. Dyslexia. I was put in a special school called Fernald School at UCLA. for special needs kids until I was able to, 6 months later, I barely squeaked by to get back to a normal school. And I really never had success of any kind as a kid, just making people laugh, getting people to laugh at me and self-deprecation, until one day, like most young boys here in America, I saw a movie called Rocky, and I was 10 years old. And I said, here's a guy like me. He makes people laugh. He always fails, but he keeps on trying to, get back up. And I said, the only difference between this guy and myself is he's physically fit. And I was not. I was far from it. So I was terrible at sports as well. So I decided that since that day, physical fitness will be a big part of my life. And 6 years later, I was 16 years old. I became a physical fitness trainer. And when I was 19, I did stand-up comedy. And when I was 20, when I was 18, I decided I'm going to the day after I graduated high school, I'm going to start my own business, because I had success as a comedian, or as comedy,
Right.
Even before I did stand up, I was having success there, in school parties, and I was a physical fitness trainer. I said, I'm going to be an entrepreneur and an actor. That's what I want to do. And my high school tutor said, you should probably try to do things with your hands, because not everybody's meant to do what they want to do. So I started business the day after high school, and I failed miserably. And then, but 6 weeks later, I decided I'm going to become a nightclub promoter. Because after I did my stand-up routine, I brought in a big, crowd. I said I could do this with nightclubs, and I became the #1 nightclub promoter for my age bracket in Los Angeles. And I did that. I was very successful. And then I started my acting career. My first job was playing Dirt Diggler in the Dirt Diggler Story, which became the movie Boogie Nights, which I appear in as well. And then I left my nightclub business, and I said I'm going to do what my friend Paul Thomas Henderson did and become a successful filmmaker. So then I went off to do documentary films. I did a very successful short film, a vehicle to try to get me, jobs in Hollywood to be a director. And I came close to a movie deal for one of my screenplays, but it didn't turn over to a movie deal. And by this time, working, for 6 years in production and, spending money on film and no nightclub premiere anymore, nightclub, business, I was broken in debt. I said, screw Hollywood. I'm going to make my own movie. But I was broken in debt. And how was I going to make this money to make my own movie? So I started a business. This is back in 2000. And within 6 months, the business made $500,000. I made a movie called Love Hollywood Style with Faye Dunaway, Andy Dick, and Coolio, and a crazy comedy class, a film that Hollywood never let me make. And that, by the end of that, I almost bottomed out the business I created. And I decided to leave Hollywood. I grew that business into a business made over $100 million. And I've had this up and down career, but luckily, for the past, 20 years, I've had a trajectory of upwardness, less volatility than what I explained, and learned to find the equilibrium of somewhat success on a trajectory that constantly goes upward. And I decided I'm going to do a podcast that resembles that, called Long Shot Leaders, people that have failed and succeeded, but ultimately have overcome these large obstacles to find success. And that is why I'm here with you today.
Nice. Now you glazed over that, and there's a couple of points I want to dig in a little bit deeper in there, only because I know it now, right?
Right.
I remember when you were telling the story about you choosing to make a movie on your own, that you decided you stepped back from what you were doing, and you took on a role as, what was it, a PA? It was like a production assistant. That's what it was, to learn the film industry from the inside, right?
Right. Yeah. So what happened is that when I was, when you're a nightclub promoter, back when you're like a mini celebrity and making a lot of good money, but I didn't want to do that for a living. I saw the success that my friend had. So I said, I'm going to do that. I can do that too. Cause you start to, even though my childhood was filled with failure, you get some successes, and then you think, well, you know what? It's just time plus effort. I'm going to do it myself. Also, timing is very important as well. So I went off and I did some big documentaries. I did a documentary tour around the country, segueing from nightclubs to film, and doing a documentary on the history of house music and raves across the country.
Right on.
And I planned like big events all across the country as I was filming, showing old documentaries from the LA nightclub scene, which I directed as well, as I was directing this big, documentary on the history of house music. I did that. And after I did that, I figured, I was I had a talent, but I was uneducated in the art of filmmaking. So I said, rather than me going to college, because I saw my friend who was very successful. He dropped out of NYU, and several years later, he was nominated for Academy Award. So I said, I'm going to go into film production, particularly commercials, because you could see the beginning, middle, and end of a film production rapidly. And you also work with the best of the best, like John Schwartzman, who works with Michael Bay all the time on big, films. You'll see he's a DP, director of photography. And these guys, when they're not shooting films, they will work on commercials because they pay them per day higher than what they make per day on a film, on a motion picture. So I got to work with the best of the best for 3.5, 4 years. And I got the education, and I left my lucrative nightclub business to go deep into that, which was okay, but you make a lot less money, me being a production assistant, than I was as my own entrepreneur nightclub business. But I learned from the best of the best. And then I was also able to attain a crew when I did my award-winning short film that nearly got me a movie deal. When I decided to do that, I got the best of the best to work on my film. So there was a lot of advantages to stepping away from that and being a production assistant.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you get the education that you don't necessarily get in the classroom environment, plus the connections that you make through that education, because it's hands-on, right? Day in and day out.
Precisely.
Nice. They say, oh, this is worth $50 and that's worth $150, but this, my friends, is priceless.
It was the relationships too that you build, and getting to see, there's intellectual knowledge and then there's physical knowledge. Intellectual knowledge is what I could explain to you how to tie a shoe. Mm-hmm. And then you understand that. And you say, yeah, now I know how to do it. You have conscious incompetence because you haven't tied a shoe yet. You haven't tasted the strawberry, so you can't know what the texture of the seeds and the meat of the strawberry tastes like. But when you have physical knowledge, you go through the circumstance and you apply the mental knowledge that you're knowing, and now you're actually doing it and seeing the texture of those things, how it works. It's exponentially much more of an advantage.
Yeah, and I think that actually brings about a great point. That so many folks maybe go through the education process and they step out, I'm ready to take on the world. And then the first barrier that's not taught to them hits them, and it's going to come, right? Whereas if you go through the contextual knowledge, hey, I'm in the weeds every single day. You learn about those barriers. Sometimes you're presented and you've already overcome them. So now the next time it affords itself to you, you're like, I've already beat this a couple of times.
That's right. Yeah. And anybody that's listening that's going to college for that, that's fine. Don't get me wrong. I think that's great. If you could apply both, make sure that you give equal credence to both things, the college education, but realize that you're halfway there. And then you really got to get that physical knowledge in there to really become the full, martial artist of whatever you're trying to do.
Ah, well said. Martial artist. I actually just got finished interviewing a gentleman that used to be an Army Ranger, and he's out doing some production work. He has this vision of an A-Team style van being dropped out of like a C-130, and he wants to film the whole thing, parachutists with cameras and the whole 9 yards. And he's done some production work, but he hasn't been in that next level. So he's using his GI Bill to go back and get that education to broaden what production skills he has to make this kind of this wow factor. And then he's going through the process of documenting the whole journey, right? They're going to build the van from scratch. He's got the skill set for that, and make it look all A-Team, and getting the permissions and getting it up in the air, and then finally it's going to be this commercial for his brand. On top of that, he does combat flip-flops, so it all fits together for that macho man machismo.
Combat flip-flops. That's awesome. That's interesting that you talk about that, because there's some people, not this doesn't happen all the time, but there's, let's say doctors, or not so much doctors, because they have to, but let's say therapists, psychological therapists. Sometimes they'll get done with their education in school, and they don't really look into different modalities after they get their license. Look, I'm just going to, but if you really, want to be the best you can be, constantly learning and keeping your door open, it was Tony Robbins calls it kanai. constant, never ending improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things I've tried to do over the course of my career. And I actually have been trying to bring it into this podcast as well, as bringing people on from different backgrounds and industries that may have nothing on the surface to do with entrepreneurship, but the lessons that you can learn from them, from their industry and from their stories, can just go right to the source. You can say, look, if you learn from this lesson, you might save yourself a couple of headaches, right?
That's right. And that's so funny about the great times that we live in right now, because you and I are, close in age. We come from an era where, I remember when I was a kid, you look at the encyclopedias and those great volume of books, and you're like, well, I can learn about space or geography or the ocean or animals. And each book was fascinating to open up. Now with the internet, now with people, you can talk to an expert, or you could just turn on a podcast and you can get an amazing amount of information from people that excel at that. And you can listen to that content whenever you want. And even if you're driving, it's embedded in your subconscious. And now you're becoming a very dangerous, wonderful animal that, can become, the consciousness of society, is being raised by that. We can get into the negatives too, how we but I'm just talking about the positive end of that right now, which is there is such a great positive, towards the times we live in and learning.
I think that's a great point. And I think one of the cool things about that is I think it's opening up eyes, right? If we stick to the positive side of things, folks are going out and maybe they're listening to, the Long Shot Leader podcast or the Dark Horse Entrepreneur or this podcast or that podcast. And they're getting all these varied opinions and insights from all these stories that are beyond their scope. And they're like, wow, I never thought about it that way, which is opening their mind more than just their eyes to go, I think I could do that, whatever that may be in their world.
Yeah. And you know what's really interesting? And I don't hear people talking about this particular subject, but there is a sweet spot of generation that didn't grow up with the internet. And now that they have these modalities, then there's the generation after that takes it for granted. So there's that sweet spot generation. There's a generation before, like, let's say Generation X, the boomers, where they're not getting involved because it's just way too out there for them. There's a sweet spot generation that is now, they're so hungry for this content, and they understand the scarcity because they grew up with that. So I see, Generation Z, because I have Generation Z kids,
right?
That kind of like, take some of that for granted. Some of it's already there. They could, this TikTok, funny it is, there's actually great lessons to be learned on TikTok, but the sweet spot generation that is so hungry for the content, they're just soaking it up every day. It's like, oh my God. And that generation, a big portion of them will never get tired of it. And that generation, is becoming very powerful.
Yeah. And inside of that though, I think what concerns me is the subset of them that are all focused on gathering the knowledge. Well, that's awesome. And it's great. Keep learning, like you said, if you're going in college, awesome. If you get some hands-on experience, even more awesome. But then you got to do something with the knowledge, right?
Yes. I just talked to a great guy yesterday, AJ Yeager, who has done many things in his career. But right now he has a data company. He's a CEO and founder of a data company. And not only do they gather the data, but they take the data and they show you how to use it. This is particularly used, they're talking about data for e-commerce businesses, a SaaS company. And this data is, because we all have data. We can open up our analytics right now. And sometimes we'll look at it and, I don't know about you, like Google Analytics, you have anybody listening has an e-commerce business. You open it up and you see a bunch of data, a bunch of stats, and you're like, your brain gets a little tired and you're like, well, okay, I think I know what to do with that. But then there's companies out there that help people take that information and have actions to it, because sometimes there's so much going on right now. Things are changing so fast. It's like, what do I do with that information? Or how can I, and that's going to be a big thing, and AI and VR and all that's playing a big part in our future.
You're right. I'm a data geek. I actually started my career at the Coca-Cola Company, analyzing data for their planning, for their marketing. And we all know Coca-Cola is a marketing engine, right? And those that don't know, I just told you, now you know. But they are, and they had massive amounts of data, and a lot of it was going untapped. And even back then, when it was all on, Excel, actually, I think back then it was Lotus 123, right? Now I just dated myself. But you certainly taken those data points and, weeding through them, analyzing them, all the different mathematical terms you could exude at this point, you could start going, oh, wow, we're missing this, or here's an opportunity, or there's an opportunity. I think there's a huge opportunity for folks that don't tap into the data they have at their fingertips to, even just, hey, go do a couple of YouTube searches about how do I use my Google Analytics, and just scratching that surface, you'd be like, oh, wow, I had no idea that meant this, or this means that. And that could keep you from killing the very goose that you're trying to raise. Does that make sense?
Yeah. 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 And it's amazing how like Generation Z, something like, well, how do I do that or do that? And like, oh my God, you have the world at your fingertips. Just YouTube that. There's a video that can show you that. Yeah. It does take some patience, because everything's moving so fast right now. It's like, I always know I could play a video on it. It's like, we all want it right now, Exactly. We'll sit on TikTok for 5 hours and be like, what the hell happened?
Yeah, I know. 15 seconds at a time. What's up with that?
Yeah, a little disappointed. Or, hey, do one video for 10 minutes.
There's probably a podcast where someone says, here's what you need to know about Google Analytics. You can do that while you're driving or mowing the lawn. There you go.
That's right. That's right.
So, to loop back around, you were wanting to make this film. I'm going to do it myself, but I got to fund it. And so you started a business, right? And you mentioned you made $100 million in a short period of time. Now, no. The $100 million took a while. Okay.
What happened is that, in Hollywood, the way to get a movie deal, one of the easiest, the typical, there's no easy way. The typical route is you make a short film. If you want to be an auteur, and I did, want to be a writer and director and actor. You make a short film. You win a film festival. I won the two largest film festivals, which was Oberhauser in Germany and Palm Springs International. And my film got bought by HBO, my short film. And that was the vehicle to make a movie and get a deal with a studio to make one of my screenplays for me to direct. And I got very close with a company called Trimark Pictures, and it just fell through. And this took about 1.5 years, 2 years process. I met with every big company in Hollywood, like Joe Silver and all these, the tons of producers. And after a while, there's a lot of, Hollywood has not all of it, but has a contingent of a lot of fakers, a lot of it's a little bit of a Wild West still, as corporate as it has become. Mm-hmm. And I said, screw this, because I got tired of that. You get the money, we'll get the talent. You get the talent, we'll get the money. And I'm like, you need the money to get the talent.
Right.
That's what greenlights a film. And I said, I'm just going to make my own film because I had this hunger to do, just because people just talk so much, and that entrepreneurial part of me that was initially that I grew up with, which because I come from an entrepreneurial background, even though my dad had an up and down career. I said, I'm going to make this film. So I decided I wanted to do something on the internet when the internet was still young.
You're now listening to the Dark Horse Entrepreneur Podcast.
Mm-hmm. I started to sell Tarps, which has nothing to do with the film industry. It was just a product. I didn't care what it was. It was a widget that everybody could use. So I built a website. I did everything. I was working as a production assistant still as I'm building a website. So I'm doing 2 jobs, one that makes money, production assistant, and one that doesn't, at night, building a website to try to build an entrepreneurial career to make more money to pay for a film that I want to do. And just, it's called Love Hollywood Style. And it's kind of like a dysfunctional story about Hollywood, as my bitter story. I said, screw it. So within 6 months, it made $500,000. To make it's made $100 million since I started it. It's made over $100 million.
Okay.
Which takes long, a while, but from starting from, being in debt and broke, just, get one sale and, so that's how I was able to make, and within 6 months I said, I'm going to take that money and I'm just going to dump it into a movie because, you're like an addicted kind of guy, you're a filmmaker. You're like Ed Wood, but like, you're just like, I want to do everything I can to, to make my art. And I almost lost that business because of dump everything into your film. And at the end of that whole Tour de France of making that film, running my business out of this rented shack in Sherman Oaks, and I'm making that film out of this house that I'm running my business. And it was crazy. It's a crazy production. We just recently found the footage to it, and we're doing a documentary on that particular film, the making of that film, called Burning the Boats. And it's about, passion versus opportunity and what people throw away for their passion, or what they'll risk for. And that's the story about Love Hollywood Style and what I did and why I did it and why I started the business I'm in now.
That's, I think that resonates probably with so many artists out there, right? They have this flame burning inside of them that just won't die. And probably so many people have tried to kill it. Like your mentor or whatever it was, a tutor that said, maybe you should do something with your hands, was trying to kill your flame. And, here it was, almost a couple of decades later, still burning bright. But I guess why, and you said this, it was a tarp business because it was something everyone could use. I mean, what you had told me before, it's probably a two-part question. One, why tarps? And then you got to tell us about that first big order that you got.
Okay. So this goes back to the late 60s, even before I was born. So my dad worked with a gentleman named Alan Smith in a tool business. And the tool business wasn't doing that well. My dad went off to go sell calculators up in Canada in a mail order campaign in the early 70s. And he made millions, like a couple $1 million in 18 months. And back in the early 70s, it was a lot of money.
Right.
And he was called the Calculator Kid, because he sold so many. It was like million. When the calculator became smaller, it was like people, you fit it in your hand. Yeah. And it was this big thing. So I grew up saying, I want to be the calculator kid. I want entrepreneurship and being a hustler. Those were two big words in my growing up as a child. Before it was like hip to be called an entrepreneur or a hustler, and then through a lavish lifestyle, he lost all his money, through, sheer carnality, Tracy. I'm telling you, he lived loosely. His character, Paul, who loved my dad, Paul Thomas Anderson, loved my dad. Some of the caricatures of the Burt Reynolds character in Boogie Nights is loosely based on my dad. He had a crazy lifestyle, but he lost all his money and he was homeless again. Now that gentleman that he worked with in the late 60s, Alan Smith, he created his own tool business. He left the tool business that he was with my dad. He created his own tool business in 1975, and he called it Harbor Freight, which is a multi-billion-dollar tool company. People know it's like the Chinese, import version of Home Depot.
Right.
And I saw this happen before me. And one of the products that my dad would sell, he went back to selling tools, but he was broke at this point, and he'd have, sell the product, and he would buy it from places like Alan Smith and Harbor Freight, and his old partners, that, now we're millionaires, and Alan Smith being a billionaire. And my dad would always pitch products to me. He's like, you want to do something like I do? Because I wanted to be the calculator kid still. I wanted to be an actor, and I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And he's like, why don't you sell these drill bits, abrasive wheels? I'm like, I want to do something that's a little better. And then there was this one item that I saw that one of the guys had at one of these tool companies was tarps. And I was like, okay, this is simple. It's colorful. It's simple. And I remember hearing back in the day on the internet, somebody made a lot of money selling ceiling fans. So I knew I wanted to sell something that was isolated. This is right around was it Batteries Plus, came around and all that, I was thinking, that's simple. And I want to do that. And I also wanted to do something that was important because when I was in the nightclub business, I used to donate canned foods for the homeless. And I thought, I could take these tarps, and if I start selling a lot of these, I could donate some to the homeless, and that'll make me feel better about myself, which is what I ended up doing. So tarps just made sense to me. And that's why I adopted it. It was introduced to me through my dad, the background of my dad's tool business. And then the funny thing is that when these hurricanes came out in 2004, and then 2005 was Katrina, I bought out the entire country from all the suppliers. And that was a big needle mover for us. Of all the tarps, all the people that were competing against me, I bought them out, and I supplied the state of Florida in 2004. And then a lot of the, FEMA and Army Corps engineers, buyers for Katrina the next year for tarps. And they called me Hurricane Mike.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? I didn't get to become the calculator kid, but I'm Hurricane Mike. So that's pretty cool.
I will take Hurricane Mike. That one's pretty cool. And it's your name. You didn't have to be Calculator Kid the second.
Yeah. And I heard that at first. I'm like, I just want to be an actor and filmmaker. So that's why I was like, I don't want to be Hurricane Mike. But I was like, you know what? You said you wanted to do this when you were a kid. And that was kind of fun. So that's my whole story about why I chose that product.
No, that's cool though. Now inside there, you said something in passing that kind of made my ear perk up. Feel better about myself. So donating tarps to the homeless could make you feel better about yourself. Absolutely. Does that allude to some inner struggles you were dealing with, or just, hey, I'm making money?
What that comes from is like, so, being a ADHD or whatever, which I didn't know I had, and all the learning issues that, dyslexia and all that. I was introduced to personal development. And when I was right around when I was promoting nightclubs, and I really took to it. Matter of fact, my comedy teacher when I was 19, he studied with NLP, Richard Bandler, who created neuro-linguistic programming.
Yes.
So I was introduced to that at an early age. So I became really involved with personal development. I've done everything that Tony Robbins has ever done. I've been to Namali, his resort. I've taken all kinds of personal development courses. And the reason why I bring that up with the homeless is because I believe in, there's something called 6 human needs psychology. This is not an exact science. It's almost a perfect art form to where people do things for 6 reasons and for human needs: to feel significant, certainty, uncertainty, love, contribution, and growth. So when I say I wanted to, do something, that was going to, feel substantial, that was going to feed me.
Right.
I just don't want to sell a product that wasn't going to have anything interesting behind it, that I could do more things with it. So I said, when I talked about tarps, I was like, first of all, you could use it for outdoor stuff. There's like an adventure, type of product there. So I was like, I said, that's pretty cool. And then donating things, like when I donated canned food for the homeless, when I did clubs, that made it even sweeter, because now I'm feeding my sense of contribution, my sense of growth, my sense of significance by doing something that makes me feel important. It's a selfish end of it, but it's also, a common, these are the human needs that we all have. So if I could attach a product and now start to attach that towards, aiding my human needs. And I was cognizant of this when I started this, and choosing those things. I knew that was going to feed me. So that's what I mean by that.
Awesome. That's awesome. And I think giving back is so huge. I mean, and I say that because I've been at both ends of the scale, much like you. I mean, you've been down there at the bottom and you're like, damn, you're the one with your hand out, right? And people are like,
right.
Dropping stones on it sometimes. And I remember being down and out, and I shared a bit of my story with you, overcoming drugs and the addiction therein. And even then I was giving, and I'm not saying this to polish my own apple, but sometimes it's just a part of who you are. And if it's not a part of who you are, making it a part of who you are is a really good thing to do, because you start, like you said, you start feeling like, wow, even though I only have $20 to my name, giving $2 to someone who's even worse off than you are can just, your shoulders go back. You feel that Superman cape coming off your shoulders and you're like, all right, I'm good. And I think that does so much more for you than just continually holding your hand out, right?
Yes.
I think we see those folks. I mean, I used to live in Southern California, so you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. Those folks, you're coming off the off ramp of the freeway, standing there with their little cardboard signs, and you feel for them, right? But if we could give them the opportunity to earn their pride back, it's great. Give them $20, give them a roof over their head. But if you can start to give them their pride back by earning, their own living, I think we'd see a huge turn in a person and hopefully over time, society. Am I getting too deep here?
No, you're not. And it makes perfect sense, because that's leading back to the 6 human needs psychology, because now you're giving the sense of significance. Now you're getting the sense of growth. Now you're getting the sense of certainty of, they feel, a little bit more certain about themselves. All those, and that's a positive vehicle, because you could attain 6 human needs through a negative vehicle and positive vehicle, and not a perfect, science, but almost a perfect art form. What determines a good decision and a bad decision is a triad of, if it's good for me and it's good for you and it's good for the greater good.
Yeah,
it's probably going to be a good decision, but you need all three, but that's why it's so much better to have to push somebody, and not to have a biblical term in here, but if you say, to teach somebody how to fish rather than give them fish.
Right there it is, right there, and of course, there's a 6-pack of beer in there somewhere in that joke.
You had to grow the hops or something. I don't know.
That's right. So, this is the Dark Horse Entrepreneur. So I'm going to ask you this question: have you ever felt like a dark horse sometime in your life?
Well, does a dark horse mean like an underdog?
There it is, right there. You nailed it on the head.
Well, sure. Of course, you're talking to a guy that has a podcast called Long Shot Leaders. So I have that, and it always will be with me. And that's why I've kind of glommed on to, let's say, the story of Rocky, and that's influenced me. Or, I'll always be as physical fit as I have been since 16 years old and on. I always feel like that's because your first years, your first decade of life is the most impressionable. So I always feel like the kid that was unfit. I always feel like, that is now fit. I will feel like I have a connection towards people that have, that are underdogs because, I was that person. And it's all a state of mind, but that's who I was. That was my mantra, as who I was when I was so young. So yeah, I think that also I'm somebody that, whatever. I don't believe in ADHD, but I say that I have it because I've been told heavily that I have.
Sure. Right.
But I try to use that with a third eye of consciousness to say, okay, I'm aware that there might be parallels. So I say that I have it. So, I try to use those, as, launching boards to where, that's part of my life now. So, and helps me understand that I'm going to fail a lot in entrepreneurship. And that's okay. Edison, the classic line,
right?
That reporter, for listeners that don't know, the reporter said, "Hey, what's it?" There was in questioning Edison. So, what's it feel like for somebody to go through 1,000 mistakes to discover the light bulb? And he's like, "No, not 1,000 mistakes, 1,000 answered questions." And that's what every failure is when you're in entrepreneurship. That most entrepreneurs take the risk and realize the failure is just an answer towards getting better. And don't make the same mistake twice, or try not to.
Yeah, I think every experiment, if we stick with Edison there, every experiment gives you new data. Maybe not always the data you were looking for, right? You're like, okay, and we're going to loop back to what we were talking about earlier. It's now new data, and you can take that data with the data you already have, and you're that much better than you were when you started. You just got to take the next step and get the next round of data until you get the data you're looking for.
That's right. And get over that point where, the fear or embarrassment. I tell my daughters all the time, and I've been saying this since I was a kid because my sister would always get so embarrassed about things. I said, sometimes it's more embarrassing to get embarrassed by what you think is embarrassing.
Ooh, that's a great way to put that. I stand on the principle of always be you. And sometimes those around you will look at you a little cockeyed, like, what's up? And that's okay, right? I mean, we're all unique individuals in the first place. So there's nothing wrong with just being you. And here's the cool thing for me that I think happens when you just be you. Those folks that resonate with that, they're attracted towards you. They're like, hey, he's kind of cool. He's being himself, whatever that is. I'm going to go hang out with that guy because I want to be me too. And those that don't like you, that don't like you being you, you probably don't want them in your world anyway. You just by being you, you tend to repel them out of your sphere of influence, which is where you probably want them in the first place.
Yeah. And it's interesting. We were just talking about this the other day is that, a lot of young people that, they'll listen to that today. And we all listen to that. And people are dense, it takes repetition, it takes reps to get in there, so what I'm talking about is that when you're giving them an example of something, it's conscious competence, but it's not unconscious competence, to where it's intellectual knowledge and back to making it physical knowledge, to where you can apply these things because when you're all young, you all have that inevitable, insecurities and the internal dialogue that enables you, that disables you, to where you want to get to that point where the second half of your life, you're more mature, to where you can start to apply the confidence. You're over yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
Right. I was talking to my daughter and I said, I walked into, when I was younger, walked into not a huge agent, but a pretty big agent's office when I was, an actor. And I remember trying to please them, and when and there's nothing wrong with trying to please somebody from a certain type of place, but I was trying to just please them in every which way or form. I was nervous about making a good impression rather than going there with a sense of curiosity, and confidence. And the agent looked at me, and he can, after like a couple minutes, he sized me up and said, I don't see you as the star. I see you as the friend of. And he was very pontifical the way he said it. Now that pissed me off, but rather than taking it at the time, I said, look, this is a learning experience. Well, first of all, what can I learn from this? Well, why did he say that? Maybe it was the way I was carrying myself, rather than going there with loving vigilance, and confidence and curiosity and selfless involvement of who I was talking to, rather than just being that insecure, so it's, to be aware of these things and work at it from a young age and be cognizant of that early on, and to be open for criticism and self, reflection, really important, and to do it constantly, so you can hurry up to get to that age that we're at right now where we're like over all that and we're more confident. If we could apply that, try to do that early on as much as you can.
Oh man. And lucky it is the youngster. And of course, me being, my 50s, I say youngster, could be way 20s even, that is already there. And I've been lucky enough to see a few younger folk in my lifetime that have that mentality early in their life. And you're like, oh man, the blessings that are going to come upon you as you transition through the rest of your life and get even more wise.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, how do they get there so quickly? Mainly, that's got to be, parenting, circumstances, timing, circumstance, right? There's so many elements that come into that, but yeah, the sooner you can get there, the better.
Right. Amen to that. Well, Mike, I definitely appreciate you hanging out, and especially for the second time around. I want to be mindful of your time, but if folks want to check out more about Michael Stein, everything he's got going on, where do we want to send them to?
Just go to longshotleaders.com. That's the website for the podcast, and my social links are on there, and you could, know more about me. So you just go to longshotleaders.com. That's how you can find out about me.
And there it is. All right. So you've been dropping all kinds of ageless wisdom on us. What kind of final thought you want to leave us with? Life is only as good as the emotions that are lived within that life, so I don't want to preach, but when you asked me that question, that's the first thing that came to mind, so just, work on anybody out there, just, mindful of your emotions, 6 Human Needs Psychology, when we talk about that, speaking because we brought it up, if you are, trying to achieve anything right now, try to realize that we all do things, or if you're upset with somebody, we all do things for 6 reasons, and you can kind of test this theory out. We do it for certainty, uncertainty, significance, love, contribution, and growth. And kind of test yourself. Listen to what I just said and test that out. And we all try. Certain people do that for negative reasons. There's negative vehicles to get that and positive vehicles. Try to be cognizant of that and just do what makes you happy in that direction. Dude. All right, we're just going to leave that one right there because I'm even going to try and top that. Michael, thanks so much for hanging out with us. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Tracy. Awesome.
All right. There you have it, my Dark Horse friends and family. Michael Stein dropping Hollywood-level bombs on us. What thoughts or ideas resonated with you? Well, let me leave you with a few that stuck with me. Thought number 1, long shots, dark horses, and underdogs. Yeah, Michael Stein, he shared about how his family and he himself was a long shot, an underdog, and as we say around here, a dark horse. What's a dark horse, you may ask? All right, well, the term in itself may suggest like a dark horse is someone who is least expected to succeed within a group of individuals, no matter what the talent level inside that group of individuals. It is that very same person, that dark horse, who has the least amount of power, the least amount of authority amongst that group. Dark horses, long shots, and underdogs are never usually even considered to be on the winning side. Thus, others do not have any hopes of them rising above their station, or worse, they're probably they don't even consider them a possibility of them having that ability to rise. As a result, some could argue that dark horses are not usually even visible to others. However, there's a keen advantage that comes with being a long shot, an underdog, or a dark horse, whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to dive a bit deeper into that on episode 227, Reasons Why Being a Dark Horse is Your Secret Weapon. Thought number 2, who inspires you? Michael shared that a turning point in his youth come from the inspiration of the character Rocky. Now, here is a dark horse that no one expected to amount to anything. Many even bet against him, and he continued to move forward even after failure. Now, I have to concur with Michael. I remember seeing Rocky when I was 13 years old and having many of the same reactions and motivations that Michael did. Over the years since then, I've come to learn the benefits of finding someone to aspire to and be inspired by. So on Tuesday, I'm going to go live in the Dark Horse Facebook group, and I'm going to chat about finding people to inspire you to create a business or in life that inspires you. Thought number 3, stepping back to move forward. Michael shared about stepping back in his industry to learn more from the inside in order to move forward with his dream to create his own feature film. Stepping back to become a production assistant for some time, I believe it was like 3-4 years, in order to learn the industry from the inside out, so that when it's his turn to create his film, he had the experience under his belt to move forward constantly. To move forward confidently, all right? Constantly confidently. How about that? Sometimes it's probably more wise to step backwards in order to move forwards, even in your current business, your current relationship, your current life. I'm willing to bet you can reap some huge rewards by stepping back. Now, I'm not saying that you need to take on a lesser role in your business or in your life, but rather stepping back so that you can hear those inner voices that motivated you and prompted you to step into your current business. Now, I want to chat a bit more about this in episode 228, ways that stepping back can move you forward in business. And thought number 4, just learning versus doing. Now, Michael shared the learning by doing path that he chose to gain the necessary knowledge that he needed to create what he wanted to create. Michael chose the learn by doing path. In this same path, he made valuable network connections and learned valuable lessons in the doing that most likely would not have been learned by just learning his craft. See, look, here's the thing, and Michael mentioned it, and I concur with him. We don't want to take away the value of learning, but we also know that there's another level of learning that comes with the doing of a craft, a task, or a business. And I want to dive a bit deeper into this on Thursday. I'm going to go live in the Dark Horse Facebook group again and chat about overlearning can result in underdoing. And man, there were so many other ideas and thoughts and tips that Michael shared with us all. What ideas, inspiring tips, or thoughts resonated with you? Whatever they were, I want you to take some time today and write them down. That's right. Literally write them down on a piece of paper. Don't just type them in your phone. Grab a pen and write them down on a physical piece of paper. It's something about taking that thought or idea out of the nebulous conscious, right? The universal thought, whatever you want to call it, and pushing it into reality by writing it on a physical piece of paper. Then I want you to go out there. I want you to run your race. I want you to get your results, and then let me hear about them. Take these ideas and thoughts and put them into action. Email me at tracy@darkhorseschooling.com. Share the tips or ideas that you came away with, how you put them in action, and what results you gain from them. Heck, I probably even bring you on the show so you can share with my audience. Now, our next week's interview guest is going to be Billy Bat. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Billy Bat has gone from spending 13 years in the streets, in gangs, and in the oil fields to building a 6-figure business and rubbing elbows with multi-million-dollar entrepreneurs. Billy shares his thoughts and his insights on some unique ideas about entrepreneurship and energy. You're not going to want to miss this episode. Now, I know you want to keep getting these valuable tips and inspirational stories from the amazing guests I'm lucky enough to bring on this podcast. So please go on down there, hit that subscribe button. While you're there, go ahead, drop us a 5-star rating. Write us some kind words in the reviews. Heck, put down your thoughts. What are we doing good? What are we doing bad? Who would you like us to interview? Ask questions. I read each and every one of those reviews. And of course, do not keep all this entrepreneurial GOLD all to yourself. Share this podcast with other entrepreneurs and business owners that you think would get value from it. And with that, I'm going to leave you as I always do. Think successfully and take action.
Thank you for listening to the Dark Horse Entrepreneur Podcast.
And you know this!
Thanks for tuning in.
Check us out at www.darkhorseschooling.com.
All right.
My name is Tracy Brinkman.